A show that became an instant hit and captured the attention of millions across the globe. Baby Reindeer remained #1 on streaming service Netflix for weeks.
Have you watched Baby Reindeer? If not, what have you been doing? Everyone's watched it. Everyone and their dog has watched it.
Telling the twisted but allegedly true story of a man and his stalker. But it's what followed in real life that seems to have captured the attention of the world. Netflix sold the show as a true story, saying they'd anonymised any people involved. But after fans hunted down the real-life Martha from the show...
Since its release early this month, Richard Gadd's 7-part series, based on his true experience of being stalked, has become one of the most discussed TV projects of the year.
But some fans have come under fire after making it their mission to find out all the details of the true story behind it.
Fiona Harvey went public with Piers Morgan in the interview that broke the internet, showing that the story was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. This is Baby Reindeer Unmasked.
I watched the show that gave me more anxiety than any show I've ever watched in my entire life.
What?
Baby Reindeer.
Oh, I've heard. It's insane. Have you seen the actual lady go on Piers Morgan?
Yeah. And she's literally like how she is in the thing.
She's insane.
Oh.
And happy to talk about it.
Yeah.
And claiming she's not insane.
Right.
And not knowing how insane you look.
Yeah.
One thing is certain. Baby Reindeer and Piers' interview broke the internet and completely dominated all conversations in popular culture.
I really knew this interview was going viral when I'd be sitting scrolling through TikTok, and every 2-3 videos was someone imitating the interview, lip syncing to the interview, even dancing to the interview. I've even seen an animation of the interview. Everywhere I looked, whichever social media platform, people were talking about this interview. It's been viewed in every country in the world on YouTube. One TikTok posted on the Piers Uncensored account has over 30 million views. It's had over 60 million views across the Piers Morgan Uncensored digital platforms. The YouTube upload is on around 14 million views. It's also done really well on Facebook. One post there of it has had around 7 million views. There's just so much about it. Is she telling the truth? Is she lying? Have Netflix and Richard Gadd done her wrong? Or is she mentally unwell? There's so many questions yet to be answered. I think by doing this interview, it's like Piers Morgan has become part of Baby Reindeer 2. The story continues.
The internet took the interview and went wild.
So what degree did you end up with?
A law degree, and then I did a politics degree after that.
You say you got a photographic memory, but
Yeah.
what grades did you get?
All right grades. I mean, not top of the year or anything.
If it came to it, would you take a lie detector test?
Yeah, possibly, yeah. He asked me to sleep with him with a big green spot in his face one day. I said, no, I'm sorry, I'm not interested.
He asked you to do what?
He asked me to sleep with him. He said, would I like my curtains fixed? And I laughed, and he said, that's a euphemism. Do you want me to come home with you? And I said, I've got a boyfriend.
So you currently have a boyfriend?
Yeah.
He's a lawyer?
Yeah.
Babe, you do not have a boyfriend. Show us your man. Guys, I just can't deal with the lies.
Piers' exclusive interview took the world by storm, but not without controversy. Of the many questions and opinions posted online, one standout question reigned supreme. What's the truth? Her interview with Piers became akin to a second season of the Netflix series, with viewers coming to their own conclusions about where the truth really lies.
In this clip, we see Fiona reacting, and it's really interesting because it starts to give us a clue of how she really feels. So when she does this is one of her signs that is her sign of disapproval, or she dislikes what she's just heard. The other thing that she does quite regularly throughout the whole of the almost hour interview is she takes a sip of water. When she starts to feel stressed, you see her picking up the water and taking a sip of it. Now, you might think there's nothing unusual in that, and it's not unusual, but it generally happens because someone's mouth is getting dry, which is a sign of stress. And it's also a bit of a deflecting behaviour because it gives her time to think. And as we go through the interview, watching it for her signs of behaviour, we're not looking for signs of deception, we're looking for signs of comfort and discomfort. And that's one of her signs picking up the water. We know she's uncomfortable. She's also giving herself a few moments just to buy some time while she takes a sip of the water. And that mouth, I like to call it mouth sloshing, where that is another sign from her that she disapproves, feels defensive, and it can even be a sign of aggression, actually.
Even if the email thing was true, the rest is not. So
why would you qualify that, Fiona?
Sorry, why would I what?
Why would you suddenly qualify even if it's true about the emails?
I'm just playing devil's advocate here.
Right, but when you say even if the emails were true,
I didn't send him 41.
It doesn't mean the more serious stuff is.
Let me rephrase that.
So in this clip, we see Fiona be talking herself about the emails. And even if it was true, she closes her eyes for a long close just at the start of when she's talking with Piers. When he picks her up on her, even if it was true, we see her repeat it back to him, and she does her funny mouth thing again. She's defensive, she's aggressive, but also she's buying time because she realises she's slipped up. When someone repeats something back to you, when she's plainly heard what's been said, when someone does that, it's because they know they need a bit of time to try and reason that away. So in this clip, we see Piers repeat back to her that categorically didn't happen. And as she responds, she does this. That categorically didn't happen. So we've got a couple of things going on there. The eyes close for longer than a normal blink. This happens when someone is trying to shut out something they don't like or don't want to hear. So she's really trying to avoid that question and the response. But she answers it. That categorically didn't happen. And we've got a head shake going on there as well, a head nod, which means it probably did happen.
In the course of your relationship with Richard Gadd, you send him 41,000 emails, 350 voice messages, 744 tweets, 48 Facebook messages, and 106 letters.
That's simply not true. If somebody was sending somebody 41,000 emails or something, they'd be doing how many a day? Lots.
Well, they'd be obsessively contacting
yeah, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
What did you send him?
None of that's true. I don't think I sent him anything.
You never sent him anything?
No. I think there may have been a couple of emails exchanging, but that was it. Just jokey banter emails.
Netflix have said that these details are the real ones. That this is exactly
completely incorrect.
So we see Fiona give something really interesting away in this short clip. She said, how many would that be a day? And she puts the tongue out there and she narrows her eyes. So it's a sign of dislike, but there's also, when someone puts their tongue out, you know, as children we'd see that and we tell them it's rude and it's impolite. It's kind of a little bit of a behaviour. Have I got away with this? So I think this could be a sign of deception for her here. I think she definitely sent the emails. What she's negating is not that she sent the emails, but it was 41,000. So I think with that tongue show, we've got some evidence there that she's saying something she doesn't believe.
The background to this is that you came into contact with the late Glasgow MP Jimmy Ray, who died aged 78 in 2013, and his solicitor wife Laura, who was 62, and she was a former Labour Party member. Mrs. Ray said that she gave Aberdeen University law graduate you did graduate from Aberdeen?
Yes.
With a law degree. A trainee role at the legal firm McPhail Lawrence Partnership in 1997. Is that true?
It was called L&L Lawrence. I think she forgets the name of her own firm. It was called L&L Lawrence.
But that's all true. She gave you a trainee job.
She lured me away from another firm. She headhunted me from another firm because she needed someone to do employment law. And I'm pretty good at employment law, so... She
said that she had to sack you days later because you were completely incapable of behaving yourself.
I walked. Her staff were really, really rude to me. Most people, half the Labour Party had been up there at one point or another and walked.
But she said one was served on you.
Yeah, that's nonsense.
An interim...
We have checked this out.
Well, again, there would be a public record of
yeah,
that.
absolutely. And
you're saying that it was never served?
What we think, she served the initial documents and then
she did?
She served the initial documents and then there was no hearing. It wasn't minuted for a hearing. I said I would defend, but she mucked that up too. She didn't fill up a second initial document. She then didn't minute for decree in absence. So there is no interim interdict in Scotland.
So we hear Piers talking about Laura, and it's interesting to watch Fiona's reaction as he's talking about Fiona. We see her roll her eyes at the start of, as he starts to talk about Laura, and then we see her do a lip tightening and a small show. When you slow it down really slowly, you can see her, there's a slight side movement going on there, which is contempt. So she, in some way, she feels superior or a lack of respect towards Laura. Again, she's very expressive with this, how she feels. And, you know, as she talks about it, it is a technicality, it seems, that she didn't get served the interdict, but there's definitely some truth in that.
And it wasn't just the experts who shared their thoughts on Fiona's potential duplicity during the interview. In fact, many broadcasters questioned her contradictory and bizarre answers to Piers' questions, and commented on her unavoidable likeness to the character portrayed in the show.
She has done this interview. She says she's not the stalker that it's based on, and by the way, Richard Gadd never said it was her. Other people have said it's her. And now she's given an interview that is equally as weird and disturbing and odd and uncomfortable.
She talks about being a lawyer, but then she denied having a law degree.
Yes.
And said...
It's so uncomfortable.
And then I have a photographic memory. And he's going, so what were your grades? I can't remember.
Yeah.
It's just a very odd
so you
scenario.
deny doing this? Well, no,
Right.
not completely. And it's just, it's like, it was the most uncomfortable but riveting and fascinating watch I can remember.
Right. Now she's given this interview, I don't think it's necessarily done her the
favour.
Well, it's certainly, if people were wondering if she was the stalker before, then I think they would have watched that, and some people would have come to the conclusion she's definitely the stalker.
I think the mannerisms in the interview with her and Martha on the show are quite similar.
Yeah.
Like, I think that she, at first when I started watching it, I started thinking, oh, you know what, she's a lot more switched on and a lot more, I don't know, together than I thought. But then as time went on, I thought, no. People are going to take their takeaway from this interview. The average viewer who has watched the show is going to watch the interview and think, this is 100% Martha, first off. That's 100% Martha. Second off, I don't believe when she says she didn't do these things.
And she did slip up on the email. She did say, well, if I'd sent the email. So somebody sending 41,000 emails has got a problem. And there's sort of three possibilities. She's lying, she's truthful, or she has something called anosognosia, which is a block in the ability to see reality. Serious mental illness, serious personality disorders, literally distort reality and cannot assess it accurately.
She did then say, Esther, well, even if I did, even if I had sent those emails, it still doesn't mean the rest is true. It was one of the few moments I felt she slipped up. That seemed to me a very important moment where she was raising the spectre that she may have done, but it still didn't mean the rest is true, which, by the way, if that's the case, she was right to say that.
Yeah.
But she didn't actually admit, I sent them. For what it's worth, I think she probably did. Yeah. I think that Netflix and Richard Gadd must have actual evidence.
I mean, there she is sort of laying out this sort of wonderful legal existence with all her lawyer friends and her lawyer boyfriend. Yet when we watch the programme, we get the impression that she rather lives in a cloud cuckoo land when it comes to this existence that she claims to have.
This wasn't the only fiery debate that divided the internet. In the aftermath of the interview, many were left wondering whether it should have taken place. Viewers were split. Was Fiona due her right of reply as the self-proclaimed real-life Martha? Or was this interview an exploitative move for clicks by the media?
And what about the people who say immediately to me, the moment I announced I was doing the interview, how dare you exploit a mentally ill woman? What would you, having watched the interview, do you think that's the way it came over?
I mean, it's not my place to make a ruling on her mental state when it comes to this stuff. If she came forward as a functioning adult who was able to make her own decisions and decided she wanted to do the interview, that's her decision. It's not for me to say whether she should have or not.
I also think that's quite unfair because you're making a judgment of her mental health based on basically what's looking more like a fictionalized series.
And also, her whole point of doing the interview is that she believes she has been exploited by Richard Gadd, by Netflix, and by Clerkenwell Films. That's why she did the interview.
Where to begin?
Yes.
So much in the press. This is all over our timeline this morning. Lots of people criticising, saying that she shouldn't be on TV, that she's mentally unstable. She says...
It's all right to make a Netflix show about her, though.
Well,
I mean, you know, let's have a little less hypocrisy reality show.
Indeed.
You know?
I think the thing is, she wants to make her story clear. She said, you know, she's under a global spotlight. 74 million people have watched this, and she said, hang on a minute, I haven't had my say.
She also said she was very easily identifiable from it, didn't she?
Within 10 seconds, you could type in baby reindeer, Scottish lawyer, her real name, her identity pops up because it was a court case.
This woman is clearly mentally unwell. I think it's unethical to put her on TV to satisfy his audience's morbid curiosity. Well, how do you know she's mentally unwell? That's your assessment. We've seen no independent evidence that she has a mental illness. We've seen no evidence she ever got convicted of any crime. So who are you, frankly, to judge whether she's vulnerable or not? She volunteered to come on the show. She wanted to set the record straight. Everyone was talking about her. And Richard Gadd, of course, let's remember, has talked openly about his own mental health problems. He was given a platform despite that. So why shouldn't Fiona Harvey, given what happened to her?
However, others held a different opinion.
This is someone concerning a mental health problem. This isn't a story of just like a crime that's maybe drug dealing. This isn't someone who is a public figure. This is someone who has done something that is based on them being wrong, obviously, but also driven by some sort of mental health issue.
For you to send that many texts and that many messages, there's something not right in your mind, in your psyche. They're already fragile. Their grip on reality isn't the regular grip on reality. And so someone is already vulnerable. So to have this come at them like a ton of bricks, that's the thing that I'm like, I actually think they could have done things slightly differently there. And forewarned is forearmed, and of course Netflix don't have to provide everyone that they ever talk about with any kind of aftercare mental health support. However, as we know from some of these reality shows, there are people like myself who will be employed to be behind the scenes, holding the space, making sure everyone is okay. And it just feels like Martha, whether it's her or not, and of course she has chosen to go and out herself now, but it's saying it's not her, she's kind of left flapping in the wind a bit.
The public were also divided.
I watched it. I feel like people are a lot harsher on the guy than they should be. I feel like people should be more understanding. He made some decisions, but by the end of the series, they explained why he made those decisions. So I was like, I get it.
It was really well done, and I appreciated it showing kind of a male's perspective on going something through that I think a lot of women go through. And it was very interesting to see that side of it portrayed that way. It was very interesting also to see public reaction at the end of how people took that and either laughed or empathized with him, which we definitely empathize. This is a scary situation.
I think it's kind of hard to really believe one person over the other. I think his documentary was produced with like the intent of making a show, and so it's hard to take like everything at face, especially when he's kind of come out and said himself like, you know, this parts of this is dramatized, and so it's really hard to like really pick one person to be more truthful over the other. But I mean, I think his story was like the one to tell, and like he had a reason to tell it. So I think I do kind of side with like what he was saying and why he told the story in the first place.
It's a really interesting take on how an innocent gesture might end up in a stalking event. I think having watched the show, because it's Netflix, I do think there's probably a bit of embellishment, and so do I believe that everything that Martha did definitely happened? I don't know, but it's really hard to understand what's fact and what's fiction in a show like that, because they say based on facts, but you don't actually know what's true and what's not. But, I mean, if it's based on some facts, some of it's going to be true.
I think when it comes to a traumatic situation like that, it can be quite dangerous to interview someone like that and bring more light to it. I also know that we are obsessed with the drama of it all and we want to know those things. So I definitely see why the public is interested in that. We've jumped in on that, but I do see where it can be a little problematic and uncomfortable.
I've seen the memes. I feel like because of the topic of the show, they're not really funny. People will run jokes here and there, whatever. I feel very bad for the woman, even though she's a bit strange. At the end of the day, she had her circumstances too. Just delete all of it from the internet.
For many, the reason the story was so engrossing was because it had been heavily branded as an authentic but traumatizing tale. Richard Gadd claimed he'd changed Martha beyond recognition, yet online internet sleuths were able to identify her within days. This posed the question, Was it right for criticism to be directed towards the interview? Or did the blame lie with Gad and Netflix, who should have done more to keep her identity a secret?
People in the media should not be criticising Piers Morgan for doing an interview about someone in the news. If you're going to criticise a guy who's fictionalised someone he met in a bar when he was a barman and fictionalised a lot of stuff there, went through a miserable ordeal, but she got identified. Netflix have gleefully streamed this, and weirdly, millions and millions of people have watched this. How suddenly can they get the vapours because the person who they've been watching in a fictional drama suddenly is in reality on television and is there explaining why she does it?
Netflix started the ball rolling. That guy, Richard Gad, I tried everything I could to keep her identity secret.
Yeah, right.
Well, you know, he knew it would have come out. So let's not get on our high horse about this.
England has, to my mind, much better rules when it comes to defamation. But having said that, and as somebody who is currently adverse to Netflix, I will tell you, in my experience at least, they do tend to take great liberties when they represent what the particular facts are. And specifically in America, you have a doctrine, both defamation by implication, defamation per se, the accusing her of being a criminal, and kind of doubling down on it by saying she served time. If that is not true, she's got a whale of a case.
I think so. I think so. If it was a work of drama and they said it's a fictional account, but maybe loosely based on something that may have happened, that's one thing. I think by Netflix going all in at the start, saying this is a true story, and by their executives going into Parliament and speaking under oath and saying this is a true story, and saying she was convicted, I don't think they've got the evidence to support that statement. And then saying that, you know, we did everything we could to protect identity. No, you didn't. You chose an actress who looks very like her physically, and you made her speak very like her, and you made her behave and talk very like her. I know, because I've now sat down and interviewed the real Martha.
Netflix remained quiet against the fallout of the use of true story in marketing surrounding Baby Reindeer, calling into question whether this was a silence of confidence or if they made a serious error in judgment.
There are serious questions for Netflix, but I also think that we're not going to get any potential answers. Netflix, as far as I'm concerned, I've been contacting them regularly throughout the past couple of weeks, seeking comment on all of this. They have willfully ignored questions from journalists, and the only response we have from them is because, coincidentally, one of their policy directors was in front of a parliamentary committee and was asked about it, and that's the only way we know about their position.
But that could be quite interesting, couldn't it? Because John Nicholson MP has now written to Benjamin King, the Senior Director of Public Policy who appeared in Parliament, and he said that you told me the following, he says to him. Baby Reindeer is obviously a true story of the horrific abuse that the writer, which we know that Richard Gad obviously suffered at the hands of a convicted stalker. We did take every reasonable precaution and disguised the real life identities of people while striking a balance with the veracity and authenticity of the story. Journalists have thus far been unable to find a record of the conviction to which you referred. Can you provide me with the evidence for this serious claim which you made to me at the Select Committee? This may be the way that Netflix actually is compelled to provide any evidence that it has, isn't it, Jake? I mean, if a UK Parliament believes that you may have misled them, that's a pretty serious offence for a company like Netflix, which operates in the UK.
The reason why the story is so compelling is because it's supposed to be a true story. I mean, me and my wife watched the docuseries, and we were blown away that this really happened. I mean, it was, you know, implemented or at least stated that this woman was absolutely insane and out of her mind. How could you send thousands of emails and messages she couldn't spell? She was kind of dumb. She lied about her story. You know, she was an incredible stalker. I mean, I felt, you know, some type of way, and I didn't even experience it. And the only reason that anyone could feel that way is because it said at the very beginning of the documentary that this is a true story.
Yeah.
And so I watch your interview, and it had millions of views. And the reason why it had millions of views is because the implication of this young lady. And she actually comes on and does an interview with you. And my basic point is this: when it comes to her interview, she made a lot of claims in your interview that if any of those claims are true, that this is a huge problem for Netflix, because she said things that can be readily provable. And if Netflix did not approve any of these things, they're in a huge amount of trouble.
Yeah. It's almost inexplicable that they would allow an executive to go and testify, that they would then have this as a central feature of the series, and then would just concoct this. I mean, I'm dealing with now, and I've dealt with in the past, their legal department, and it's about as robust as you can get. So both their in-house counsel and their outside counsel. So a lot of this does not make sense to me, or has some kind of, there's something peculiar going on. Even her reaction, though, to watching that seemed just a wee bit peculiar to me as well. So there seems to echo some of your other guests here, there seems to be something that is there that we haven't discovered yet, and that the truth has not come out here in terms of what actually happened, because I cannot believe Netflix and their legal team has let this go this far.
John Nicholson, who's the SNP MP,
he's always got lots to say.
Well, he has about this. He's gone to Netflix and said, you've got to substantiate the claim that Netflix made that it was a court case.
Yes.
Because people have been looking into this and going, hang on a minute.
Right.
Okay, it was a situation.
Right.
And the police were involved, but no one can actually see that it went through they said she was guilty.
And
she went
did
to
they not
prison.
say she went to prison? And as Piers Morgan said when he interviewed her, if that's the case, it should be easy enough to check.
Yes.
And I can't believe that nobody has checked it. And I'm beginning to wonder now whether this guy, Richard Gadd, has slightly gilded the lily. You know, in terms of, them saying this is a true story. Some of it obviously is true.
Yes.
But maybe he's invented bits of it in order to make it slightly more sort of sexy or something.
Exactly right. It's those words at the beginning, this is a true story. That's what drew me in. I thought, my God, this is actually, this has happened to somebody.
Yes.
This is a real character.
Yeah.
You can't just suddenly make up a huge thing.
Right.
Like she went to prison and she was jailed or what have you.
But ultimately, it must be questioned if the blame lies with Richard Gadd.
Richard Gadd himself is a self-confessed, very damaged guy. He admits that very openly, honestly. Yes. He took a lot of drugs. You see that depicted in the series. He had, he had relationships with trans women. He had relationships with gay men, with straight women, and so on. He admits to a lot of experimentation with that, a lot of it fueled by drugs and so on. How reliable a witness is he to even his own life?
No, absolutely. That was a point I made a few minutes ago, which is that he is also distorted in his, not just memory, but his actual perception of reality. Just take the reckless drug use, that is enough to lay down complete distortions of what was actually happening at the time, plus the trauma, plus the recurrent traumas, plus he must have some characterological things going on as well from all those traumas. Think about being a trauma survivor, particularly in childhood trauma. His father was a trauma survivor. These things have a way of recurring themselves. And the distortions of how they happen can be profound. So who knows where the truth actually is?
You may conclude watching the interview, look, I don't think she's telling the truth here, 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 and here. But on that central point, if she is able to establish beyond any doubt that she was not convicted of any offence, let alone admitted, and has never been to court in relation to any of this stuff, I think she has a pretty open and shut case.
I will tell you this, it's about as close to a slam dunk if that's true. But I'll tell you, there's some just peculiar reactions, there's some peculiar things. And like I said before, the robust in-house and outside counsel that they have, I just cannot believe that everybody dropped the ball on this. That just seems unbelievable to me.
Fiona has since sued Netflix for defamation in a $170 million claim in California, calling it the biggest lie in television history. Netflix said it would stand by the right of the programme's writer, Richard Gadd, to tell his story. We spoke to Mark Stevens, CBE, a solicitor specialising in media law, to tell us how much of a case Fiona Harvey may have.
If the woman who is portrayed as the stalker had sent 41,000 emails, if she'd heckled him at a show, if she'd attacked his girlfriend, if she had gone and waited for days and hours outside his house and harassed him, if she'd attacked his parents, then, and if she'd been charged and convicted with the crime of harassment, then of course that would all be true. And she has denied it in the interview with Piers Morgan, and as a consequence, she would be susceptible to libel claims. On the other hand, if these allegations are completely false and there's no substance in them, so for example, instead of 41,000 emails, there were something like a mere 18 or 20, then of course that would put a very different complexion on it, and it would be defamatory of her, and she would be able to bring a claim against both GAD and Netflix. If she brings a claim, she has to demonstrate that, or she has to say that the allegations are false. Obviously, a defense of Netflix and Mr. GAD would be that it was true or substantially true, and they would have to show that not only had she harassed and stalked him in the way that has been identified, in order to defend themselves. If they can't demonstrate that it's substantially true, so for example, she was convicted of harassment, then in those circumstances, she would be entitled to judgment, she'd be entitled to an injunction to restrain publication and further rebroadcast of this particular program. The fact that the Red Baby Reindeer story has essentially been anonymized is obviously helpful to Netflix, but they have to do it in a way which makes clear that it isn't the person it's intended, or they have to make it so good in terms of anonymizing that the woman is not identified or identifiable. And of course we know that online sleuths have identified her fairly readily. We've seen how similar the actress is in body type and voice to her. She's readily identifiable, and the libel law says if you are identifiable, even as a small group of individuals, then you are liable for the defamation that you've made of her, assuming that these allegations are untrue. The fact that Richard Gadd has asked for people to stop speculating is kind of irrelevant, because either she had to be unidentifiable or it had to be a completely fictional story. In this particular case, what we've got is part of that trend of, if you like, faction, where fact and fiction merge into one. And in those circumstances, Netflix and Richard Gadd are saying this is a true story. So if it's a true story and the person is identifiable and has been identified correctly, then in those circumstances, anything that's defamatory in the show, they're liable for. There may well have been people who have been sympathetic to Fiona online, but by the same token, there's been a lot of people who have been anything other than sympathetic. They've traduced her, they've threatened her, and in those circumstances, as a matter of law, she has already suffered serious harm. And as a consequence, she's got through the legal gateway that you have to pass through as a plaintiff to show that there was serious harm to her reputation. She has suffered serious harm. It's quite clear by the very fact that she's been on the show, she's had to defend her reputation. And I appreciate this is counter to the current narrative, but if she's identifiable and it is untrue, then it's a very serious libel of her indeed.
Throughout her interview on Piers Morgan Uncensored, Fiona adamantly denied the allegations against her, refuting any wrongdoing, and even declared Richard Gadd as mentally unwell.
I think he always wanted this to come out, to persecute someone, and I just generally think he's got extreme psychiatric problems.
Since then, more has come to light, and it turns out that this was not the first time Fiona was accused of stalking. In a turn of events, it was revealed by The Sun that Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer was also allegedly victimised by Fiona. The paper exclusively revealed the multiple threatening emails she had sent him, reigniting the conversations about whether Fiona had been telling the truth in her interview with Piers.
It now turns out that she's being accused of stalking Sir Keir Starmer.
That's right. So you go back 4 years almost, 2000. She sent 276 messages to the Labour leader. You know, this could be seen, you know, another case of, you know, say the word stalking, but, you know, it's certainly intense communication between her and the Labour leader. I think it's interesting because you do wonder whether you do have a case of actually contacting an MP if it's your MP, but I think it seems like she lived in the neighbouring constituency, so you do have to ask the question why.
She was living in Camden, right?
She was living in Kilburn, I think, and he's obviously the MP for St Pancras and Camden. Right. So, yeah, you do have to raise questions of why she was so intensely, and also the fact that it was just a general abuse towards the family. You know, talking about.
She was not very nice about his wife.
Yeah, no, exactly, and it's very, you know, pretty unsavoury comments. To be honest. So,
and, I mean, in terms of some of the things that she says, I mean, it does sound as if it's a little bit unhinged, doesn't it?
Yeah, and also I think it just shows and represents exactly what MPs have to put up with day in, day out. This is someone who Keir Starmer does not technically represent, and you know, MPs up and down the country are getting all sorts of abuse, and it's not only Keir Starmer as an MP has to put up with this; it's the staff and it's the caseworkers who have to wade through this. And every time that someone's getting some abuse like that, they're not dealing with, you know, real cases that are coming through, whether it's to do with housing, whether it's to do with healthcare or whatever, anything that an MP may be able to help with. So it is pretty, you know, it's almost, you know, it's a bad situation all round.
It's fair to say she clearly just finds targets and then, you know, attacks them with emails.
Well, I wonder if there's anyone in Britain that she hasn't stalked. I mean, the fact that she's bombarded him with, what is it, 236 emails over a short period of time. 276 emails, sorry, according to Hollywood Reporter and others. I mean, it's nothing less than obsessive, is it?
Useless barrister, stupid little boy, said his wife, Lady Victoria Starmer, looks dreadful. It's the same shtick as Richard Gadd went through, so it does seem that Victoria Harvey may have been sort of all-round exploited. She's clearly a vulnerable person. But I don't know why she's allowed to do all of this. You know, Starmer, then Richard Gadd's got 41,000 emails.
Well, she now maintains
350 voicemails, and she's never been arrested. I mean, this is stalking.
It also came to light that Fiona had bombarded a Daily Mail journalist with phone calls.
I mean, what's interesting is a Daily Mail journalist interviewed her, and then she did start to bombard him with calls. You know, he says he got over 50 calls in a few hours and so on. So that is indicative of somebody who may have done this before. It doesn't mean she necessarily did everything she's accused of doing, but it's interesting.
In the baby reindeer story, Richard Gadd wrote that Martha had stalked her former boss, who was a barrister, and tortured their disabled son. When questioned by Piers in the interview about this, Fiona rejected the story as completely made up and fictionalised.
The Sun reported an interview with Laura Ray, who you've referenced, who accused you of inappropriate behaviour whilst you worked with her. Now, the background to this is that you came into contact with the late Glasgow MP Jimmy Ray, who died aged 78 in 2013, and his solicitor wife Laura, who was 62, and she was a former Labour Party member. Mrs Ray said that she gave Aberdeen University law graduate you did graduate from Aberdeen?
Yes.
With a law degree. A trainee role at a legal firm, McPhail Lawrence Partnership, in 1997. Is that true?
It was called L&L Lawrence. I think she forgets the name of her own firm. It was called L&L Lawrence.
But that's all true. She gave you a trainee job.
She lured me away from another firm. She headhunted me from another firm because she needed someone to do employment law. And I'm pretty good at employment law, so... She
said that she had to sack you days later because you were completely incapable of behaving yourself.
I walked. Her staff were really, really rude to me. Most people, half the Labour Party, had been up there at one point or another and walked.
She then said that following you leaving, obviously very quickly, that you then harassed her. You were then known as Fiona Muir, obviously, as you said, Muir Harvey. Mrs Ray said she was so frightened she issued workers at her firm with personal alarms. You were then served an interim interdict to stop you from contacting the lawyer or her politician husband? Daily Record reported
she
that.
Messed up, I know, and I've still to speak to David about that, the author of that Daily Record article. She didn't. She messed up because I went into the Court of Session, the High Court in Edinburgh, to get countrywide interdicts, an interdict and an injunction in Scotland and England because I was going to move to London anyway. She mucked up.
Sorry, you went into court to get them yourself?
Yes, but there
Against
was
who?
no need against Laura Walker and Jimmy Ray.
But she said one was served on you.
Yeah, that's nonsense.
An interim
We have checked this out.
And again, there would be a public record of
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. And
You're saying that it was never served?
What we think, she served the initial documents, and then
she did?
No. She served the initial documents, and then there was no hearing. It wasn't minuted for a hearing. I said I would defend, but she mucked that up too. She didn't fill up a second initial document. She then didn't minute for decree in absence, so there is no interim interdict in Scotland.
Why would two people who have no contact with each other at all, Laura Ray and Richard Gadd, why would they both portray you as a very unpleasant harasser?
I don't know why Richard Gadd has, but Laura Walker, it was certainly because I was going for parliamentary selection.
Following her denial of these accusations, lawyer Laura Ray has since come public as the barrister referenced in the Netflix series, claiming she was stalked by real-life Martha after firing her after just 2 weeks for aggressive and inappropriate behaviour towards her colleagues. She joined Piers Morgan to speak on her experience of stalking from Fiona Harvey, which she says went on for years longer than Richard Gadd's experience.
You yourself were identified very quickly from the series because there could only have been one Scottish lawyer who'd been through this experience with Fiona Harvey because it was all documented.
Well, I think it's because it was so unusual that she was a female stalker stalking another female. And so I was actually identified by the press before she was. I think the press sort of held back a bit with her for about a week, and then I think it was The Sun who came out and said who she was.
This was the Sunday Mail, one of the top Scottish papers at the time. MP wife and the stalker, your husband Jimmy was an MP at the time.
Yeah.
And it was a front page splash story. So this wasn't a quiet, small thing. This was a massive news story in Scotland that people would have been aware of.
It was indeed, yes.
So when you realised that your story was being recounted, albeit with the names changed, in Baby Reindeer, how did it make you feel?
Well, I just couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe what was going on, and I was in a state of shock for about a week.
Really?
Yeah.
It had a really bad effect on you?
It had a very bad effect on me, and even now after 5 weeks or so, when I'm getting over it a bit, it's still very triggering every time I see something. I mean, I've never watched YouTube before, apart from when I saw your programme a few weeks ago. And yet every day there are more comments and people, psychiatrists and so on, going on talking about the show, analysing your interview. And it just all triggers everything back to me every time I see it. It's very, very distressing.
Have you been emotional about it?
I have, yes.
You've been left to tears from it?
Well, yes. I mean, I'm a reasonably robust person. I'm an advocate. I appear in court all the time, so I'm not easily prone to tears, but this has got me very, very anxious and upset. And particularly since a few weeks ago, I thought she was down in London, but a few weeks ago, we were told that in the little village near us called Baclivey, which is where she's from originally, she's now been looking to buy a house, we've been told. Now, I don't know whether that's true, but apparently journalists were going round the doors in Baclivey about 2 weeks ago asking about this. So I'm extremely concerned that this woman not only is abusing me on the internet, on her Facebook pages, and on every opportunity she can, defaming me, but she might also be moving close to where I live.
Do you feel threatened by that?
I do feel threatened. I always felt threatened by her, because I just never knew what she was capable of. She phoned up a disabled solicitor that we used to do Edinburgh agency work for, and she phoned him up and said to him, "Oh, I just want you to know that all the people here in this office, nobody likes you, everybody says nasty things about you and makes comments about you." Now,
and what was his disability?
He was, I think he'd had polio, so he couldn't walk properly.
Oh my God.
So, you know, It was nasty stuff. She grabbed a phone from one of my members of staff who was on trying to explain something to a client who obviously was giving him some difficulty, and she then started shouting abuse down the phone at the client. So there was a whole number of these incidents, and I had spent a few days in London. I was on the executive of the Association of Personal Injury Lawyers, and I think it was one of their meetings I was at and doing other things in London, seeing clients. And I came back to the office this was at the end of the second week, so there'd been a few incidents I was aware of. But by the time I got back, there was more and more being reported to me. Staff members in tears because of the way she'd spoken to them. So I got her into the office and I said, look, this is not on. I put some of the stuff to her. I asked her about the phone line, and she said, no, I didn't do that, And then she says, oh, well, yes, I did, but I thought it was the right thing to do. So I just said, well, I don't think, you're cut out for here. So I said to her, I'm afraid that's it. I paid her for the month. She'd only been there 2 weeks and obviously had done nothing apart from cause complete havoc. And then she said, I'm not leaving. I'm going to phone the Law Society, I'm not leaving. And she then started shouting and screaming, running around the office. And eventually my cashier and I, Carol Ann, had to get one arm on either side of her and actually march her out of the office. And she stood out there for at least half an hour screaming abuse. And that was when it all started. Thereafter, every day I'd come into the office, the answer phone would be full of messages, all from her, all threatening, nasty.
What kind of threats?
I'll get you, you're not going to get away with this, I'll get Jimmy Ray, all that sort of stuff. I know that sounds a bit vague, but the way it was said was in a very threatening manner. She did this for nearly 5 years. So what she would do, given that way back in 1997, this was really at the start of the internet, so people weren't emailing to the same extent they do now. What she would do would be phone up other solicitors or send them faxes with defamatory stuff about me, saying how terrible I was, how terrible the firm was, accusing people of everything under the sun. And then, I would get phone calls from people I didn't know who would say, I'm really embarrassed. I've had this fax through from this woman. I don't know her and I don't know you, but I thought I ought to bring it to your attention. So I had issued the staff with panic alarms, right back at the beginning when all this started, because, I had grown adults in tears, terrified that she was going to harm them, terrified that something awful was going to happen.
She also claimed that you and your husband, Jimmy, who's sadly no longer with us, but he accused you of assaulting your 3-year-old son, Frankie, who was born with a rare chromosomal disorder.
She made 5 complaints to the social work department, eventually screaming at them down the phone, demanding that my severely disabled son be taken into care. Now, to my mind, that was the point at which I thought, no, enough is enough.
Have you ever met Richard Gadd?
No.
Because I put this question to her about how unusual it is to have somebody stalking 2 completely different people, both of whom, by her estimation, are fantasizing. Let's take a look. Why would 2 people who have no contact with each other at all, Laura Ray and Richard Gadd, why would they both portray you as a very unpleasant
I don't know why Richard Gadd has, but Laura Walker, it was certainly because I was going for parliamentary selection.
The 2 different, you get my point, 2 different people.
Yeah, but Richard Gadd has Googled that. Richard Gadd has used that as
well, that's in the drama,
show.
Is when they find out that you had previously harassed this family.
I haven't harassed that family.
When you saw that exchange, what went through your mind?
I was horrified. I mean, I've actually watched your interview a few times because the first time I saw it, I was in such shock watching her, seeing her, it just brought it all back again. And I've watched it several times to see what is it she's saying about me. And it's unbelievable that after the things she did, that she can say she wasn't harassing my family. Of course she was harassing my family.
For many years?
For many years. For longer than Richard Gadd.
Do you think she's capable of violence against you? Is that what worries you?
Well, that is what worries me, yes. I don't know what she's capable of because I don't even think she would be remembered thereafter. So I don't know what she is capable of. But if somebody threatens to kill you on several occasions just because they may have personality disorders, doesn't mean that they won't actually try and do it.
In a story that captured the attention of millions around the globe, there are still more questions than answers. But one thing is for certain. This story is far from over.
People to be asking this, watching you thinking, either she's genuinely innocent here, or she's a terrible liar.